Welcome back to Face the Nation. We turn now to the devastation of Hurricane Helene. She made landfall in Florida early Friday and swept through southeastern states. The damage has been enormous in terms of the death toll and loss of homes and businesses. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell joins us now for an update on the recovery efforts. Administrator, thanks for being here. What can you share about the latest death toll from this devastating hurricane?
Good morning, Robert. Right now, I'm here in Florida, and I believe yesterday, as I traveled with the governor to assess damages there, he accounted for 11 deaths here. But I would refer to the states for the specific numbers because they're the ones that are tracking this. But what I can tell you is we are getting reports of multiple fatalities across the 5 states.
Which regions have been hardest hit?
So this has been, Robert, a true multi-state event. I have seen, my team on the ground has seen significant impacts in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee. I saw the impacts here in Florida yesterday. I'm traveling to Georgia today so I can see the impacts firsthand there. And I'll be in North Carolina on Monday so I can assess the impacts there. But we're hearing significant infrastructure damage to water systems, communication, roads, critical transportation routes, as well as several homes that have been just destroyed by this. So this is going to be a really complicated recovery in each of these 5 states that have had these impacts.
And where has the flooding been worst? Where do you see real problem areas still at this moment?
Well, here in Florida, they had up to 15 feet of storm surge in Taylor County, which is where I was at with the governor yesterday. These are record storm surges across the Big Bend area. I heard reports of up to 9 feet of storm surge in the St. Pete Beach area. In North Carolina, we're still in active search and rescue mode. They're still having flooding issues and landslides. And so we're still actively working on search and rescue missions up in North Carolina. But we've had significant wind and flooding damage again in all 5 of these states.
Was North Carolina in particular prepared for this level of flooding? Have they ever dealt with anything at this magnitude?
I think this is really, Robert, historic flooding up in North Carolina, and especially this western part of North Carolina. I don't know that anybody could be fully prepared for the amount of flooding and landslides that they are experiencing right now. But we have had teams in there for several days. We're sending more search and rescue teams in there. Water is a big concern right now as well. And so we have sent bottled water in, but we also have the Army Corps of Engineers that's getting ready to start assessments today to see what we can do to help get those water systems back online quickly. And we're also moving in satellite communication, Starlink satellites into the area to help facilitate the lack of communication that part of the state is experiencing.
And what are you seeing in terms of health consequences from this hurricane, in terms of water quality, access to food, access to medicine?
All of it is having really significant impacts. We know that many healthcare systems have been impacted. And so we also have healthcare assessment teams that are assessing the hospitals and the ability to support the people that are experiencing impacts from this storm. There are multiple boil water notices across all 5 states. And so that's why we're bringing in teams to help assess those water systems to see what we can do to get them back online as quickly as we can. But we're also, again, bringing in the commodities.
How do you conceptualize this storm in the broader question of climate change?
Well, I think what we're seeing, Robert, is, this storm took a while to develop, but once it did, it developed and intensified very rapidly. And that's because of the warm waters in the Gulf. And so it's creating more storms that are reaching this major category level than we've seen in the past. It's also creating greater amounts of storm surge in the coastal areas. It's creating greater amounts of rainfall as it moves up north. And so in the past, when we would look at damage from hurricanes, it was primarily wind damage with some water damage, but now we're seeing so much more water damage. And I think that is a result of the warm waters, which is a result of climate change.
And here in Washington, the question now turns to resources. Does FEMA have what it needs to deal with this level of storm, this moment in history with this kind of hurricane?
Well, we absolutely have enough resources from across the federal family. FEMA's one part of the team, and we have the ability to bring in all of our team members from many other federal agencies to support this response. As we move into recovery, we can pivot those resources to help support that recovery portion. Recovery can be complicated. These 5 states are going to have very complicated recoveries, but we will continue to bring those resources in to help them, technical assistance as they're trying to identify the best ways to rebuild.
Administrator Criswell, we appreciate your time and best wishes to all of those helping those in need in this area of the country. A tough moment. We'll be right back. We're joined now by retired Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. He did serve as National Security Advisor in the Trump administration, but he has not endorsed either candidate in the presidential race this time around. He's also a CBS News contributor and the author of a new book, At War with Ourselves. Good morning, General. Thanks for being here.
Robert, great to be with you.
You just heard from retired General McChrystal. He has made an endorsement. You have not. Why not?
Well, Robert, I respect his ability to make that decision and right to make that decision. But what concerns me these days is the military is getting drug in to partisan politics. And you hear really both parties trying to involve the military. Now, of course, General McChrystal is endorsing Vice President Harris as an individual, but I think sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between an individual endorsement and the military getting drug into partisan politics, right? You hear this narrative these days, from some people on the far right that the military is woke, or from the far left that the military is extremist. Hey, the military is not woke or extremist, right? The military is doing its duties under the Constitution and for whoever's elected commander-in-chief. So that's been a big part of my reticence. And then the other role is, I think, Robert, the other reason is, I don't think anybody needs me to tell them how to vote, right? In the book and in other venues, I lay all of it out, right? The good, the bad, the ugly, of the Trump administration. But I do so in context of the 8 Obama years that followed it and the 4 that preceded it and the 4 Biden years that followed it. So I think voters should make their own decisions. And what I've tried to do is help inform voters, no matter which way they're leaning.
Let's turn to the Middle East. What's your view? You heard from Senator Cotton, you heard from General McChrystal. How do you see a possible war on the horizon, if any, between Israel and Iran? Or is there something that can be done, especially by the United States, to contain what is happening?
Robert, I would say there already is a war between Israel and Iran. And it's a war that Iran has been waging for 4+ decades. Nasrallah, who was there at the beginning of Hezbollah, who was there when they killed 241 Marines in Beirut and began a campaign against not only who Nasrallah called the cancerous boil of Israel, but the great Satan of the United States. And Nasrallah, remember what his catchphrase was at the end of almost many of the speeches that he gave, which was, "The Jews are vulnerable because they love life. We can take that away from them. We will win because they love life and we love death." And so the Israelis have had really no choice. Remember, right after the heinous attacks of October 7th, that's when Hezbollah launched rockets at Israel in solidarity with Hamas. That resulted in the evacuation of 10% of Israel's territory. About 70,000 Israelis are out of their homes. And so I think Israel is taking the right approach to escalate against an enemy who's been able to escalate really on their own terms with impunity. And I think increasingly the United States has to act like we know what the return address is in Iran. Now's the time to double down on the pressure on Iran, to dry up the cash flow.
What does that mean, though? Just in terms of financial action, or do you expect there might need to be a U.S. military role down the line for the United States in the Middle East?
Well, there already is a military role.
In terms of ground troops or airstrikes?
Well, I think both. All of this should be kind of on the table, and I think we should act like we know where those rockets are coming from. The 150,000 rockets that Hezbollah has pointed at Israel, the 40,000 or so members of Iran's proxy army in Syria, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas in the West Bank, what remains of Hamas in Gaza, those were all trained, equipped, supplied by Iran to create this ring of fire around Israel and to destroy Israel and kill all the Jews. The precursor to that is to act against us. Robert, 175 attacks against U.S. forces and U.S. installations by Iranian proxies since October 8th of last year.
General, you say the United States and Israel should be in lockstep or at least aligned as they move forward. But the Pentagon has said, the Biden administration has said they were not informed about these attacks ahead of time. So what does that say about the real state of play between Israel and the United States?
I think what Israel has determined is that it had to protect its security and secrecy around this operation. If you think about the blows that they delivered to Hezbollah in the past week, 10 days, it's really unprecedented. You know, just killing so many of them, wounding so many with the beepers and then the walkie-talkies. And then when they couldn't talk securely, they met at a location in Beirut, struck that target. So, you know, Nasrallah has been taken out, but so has all the cadre around him. These are decades long of relationships and knowledge. And so I think now's the time to put on the financial sanctions. Why did the Biden administration not enforce the Trump-era sanctions against Iran and allowed about $100 billion to flow to that theocratic dictatorship? Now's the time to reverse that policy.
So Israel has taken out military targets. Lebanon is saying that many civilians have been killed. What should the U.S. do in terms of protecting civilian deaths moving forward? Yeah. Talking to Israel about that issue. What needs to be done on the civilian front?
Well, what you want is you need firepower to overwhelm this enemy, but you also want to apply that firepower with discrimination.
Is that being done?
Well, it depends on the calculus at the time. Remember, the bunker in which Nasrallah was killed was underground, several stories underground, underneath where? An apartment complex. And so it's Hezbollah. Remember, he said, we love death. Remember what Hamas leadership said just before the October 7th attacks. The purpose, one of the purposes of that attack was to get some of their own people killed, you know, so they could use that against Israel. So it's really important, I think, at this stage, to continue to impress on the Israelis, apply firepower with discrimination, but also to recognize that these terrorist organizations are the principal causes for the violence and destitution and the suffering of the people in Gaza and the people in Lebanon. Look at the great promise of Lebanon. It's a beautiful country. Look at what Hezbollah has done to that country with their alliance with the Syrians in the 2000s. Remember, we had the Cedar Revolution in 2006 after Hariri's assassination. I mean, the Lebanese people are destitute in large measure because of Hezbollah.
And just finally here, former President Donald Trump, who you know well, he met with President Zelensky in recent days. He keeps talking about being able to broker something between Zelensky and Putin. Do you buy it?
You know, I don't really buy it in terms of, you know, hey, in 24 hours it can be, you know, I think it's a real myth, right? It's a real misunderstanding of war to assume that you can get a favorable political outcome without a favorable military outcome. That's never really happened in war. And so I think the right course of action is, if you want to accelerate toward progress toward a settlement, is to convince Putin that he's losing the war. I think that's the only way you get a favorable settlement. How do you do that? You demonstrate our resolve to continue to support the Ukrainians as they defend themselves against this continued onslaught by the Russians. That's how you get to maybe favorable conditions for negotiation.
General McMaster, we appreciate you coming on Face the Nation. Hope you come again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll be back in a moment. We turn now to the former Republican governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. Governor Hogan, thanks for being here in one of the key Senate races in the country. You are not running alongside former President Donald Trump in your race, but he's front and center. How are you able to distance yourself, if at all, in such a contested, heated political environment?
Well, you know, I think I've been one of the leading kind of voices of opposition in my party for quite some time, and I'm continuing to do that. We're actually running 20 or 30 points ahead of Donald Trump in our state. And, you know, I think I have a completely separate identity after, you know, being governor for 2 terms in the bluest state, or one of the bluest states in America. You know, we have a separate, you know, identity. I stand up to him probably more than just about anyone, and I'll continue to. He's endorsed you, but it's not like you've welcomed that endorsement. But when you go into that voting booth, I know it's private, but who are you going to vote for? Well, look, I've said neither one of the 2 candidates has earned my vote, and the voters in the country are going to be able to make that decision.
So there's no chance you vote for Trump?
I'm not going to. I didn't vote for him in 2016 or 2020, and I've made that pretty clear. But look, I'm not running just for the Republican Party, or it's not just about red versus blue, which is what my opponent wants it to be about. I'm concerned about the red, white, and blue, and I'm willing to put country over party, and I'm hoping that the voters will be willing to do the same thing.
I asked retired General McChrystal this about former President Donald Trump, who in recent days on the campaign trail has attacked Vice President Harris. He's said she has mental issues. He has said thing after thing, questioning her intelligence, her ability. Do you believe former President Donald Trump is fit for office or not?
Well, I think all of that is outrageous and unacceptable, and I've already called him out when he had the one interview where he was questioning her racial identity, and now he's questioning her mental competence, and I think that's insulting not only to the vice president, but to people that actually do have mental disabilities. And I've said for years that Trump's divisive rhetoric is something that we could do without. I think he's his own worst enemy, and I think I'm very concerned about the toxic and divisive politics that seems to continue. Back and forth. It's what people are so fed up with. It's why they want to change Washington, and it's why I'm running.
When you were governor, you have often said you did not try to go against abortion rights in any significant way, but the U.S. Senate's a totally different place than being governor, as you know.
Yes.
If you were elected to the United States Senate this November, would you support eliminating the filibuster to secure abortion rights?
Well, I'm going to, on day one, support the compromise bill to secure Roe and protect abortion rights all across the country so that no one ever comes between a woman and her doctor. I don't agree with both my opponent and Donald Trump about trying to do away with the filibuster.
Why not?
So we can jam things through on a partisan basis on one vote, so we can have the pendulum swing back and forth and create more divisiveness. I think we need to find buy-in and bipartisan cooperation, just as I did in a state that has a 70% Democratic legislature. But we did things like cut taxes and lower the cost of health care and to pass a criminal justice reform act. We got to find a way to get people in Washington to stop just name-calling, stop trying to jam things through on the left or the right. And the filibuster it requires bipartisan cooperation and consensus, and that's exactly what I think we desperately need in Washington.
But what do you say to that Democratic voter in Maryland who says, I liked you as 2 terms as governor, I'm a Democrat, but I voted for you, but I need you to go further on abortion rights than saying, I'm not going to touch the filibuster. They want you to break the filibuster.
Well, I'm not sure there are too many of those. Look, I'm very supportive of women's right to make those decisions, not to come between a woman and her doctor. I'm going to sponsor a bill on protecting Roe. I'm going to sponsor a bill on IVF. I ran for governor promising that I would not change, that I would not do anything to limit access to abortion. I kept that promise for 8 years, and I'm now promising them again that I'm going to fight for that when I'm in the United States Senate.
If you are in the United States Senate, what kind of Republican Party would you be part of? You always have cast yourself in our conversations over the years as a traditional Republican. You've praised former President Ronald Reagan. It's Trump's party.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm running. I think we need to get the country back on track. I'm standing up. I'll stand up to the current president, the former president, or the next president when I think they're wrong. I'll work with them when I think they're right. I'll stand up to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. It's what I've done my entire career. I've been a leading voice in America to try to do something about this, very divided country where all we do is fight with one another and nothing ever gets done. I'm a guy that likes to get things done. I'll work across the aisle in a bipartisan way, as I did for the past 8 years. And I think that's what we really need in Washington. I think it's what most people want.
But is it possible? I mean, looking at your own record, you thought about, flirted with a possible no labels or independent run for president over the past year or so. And former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, for example, from Wyoming, a Republican, she's broken with Trump. She recently suggested, as I'm sure you've heard, that it might be time for a new party. Do you believe that's right? Is it maybe time for the traditional Republicans, the non-Trump Republicans, to say, enough, time for something new?
Well, I'm not willing to give up. I really believe that a healthy and competitive two-party system is important for our country. I'm very concerned that I believe both parties are way off track from what their kind of base core values used to be. I think the Democratic Party is moving too far to the left. I think the Republican Party has, as you said, become more of a Trump party. But I'm not willing to give up. It's why I'm running. It's also why I stepped up. I got in this race when the bipartisan deal fell apart to secure the border, supply support and funding for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, and people voted against it because they didn't want to give a bipartisan win. My whole emphasis has been about how we find consensus, how we find common ground for the common good, and that's what I based my whole career on. And so I'm hoping that the voters will actually want that kind of leadership in Washington. If they decide just another partisan, rubber stamp politician, and they just want to vote based on red or blue, I'm not going to be in the Senate. But if they want to change Washington, I think I'm exactly the kind of person that can make a difference.
If former President Donald Trump calls you up on the phone in the next few weeks and says, Larry, I'd like to go to an Orioles game with you, and then maybe have a campaign rally, would you appear with Trump in Maryland?
No, I don't think I will. I don't think he's going to spend much time in Maryland because he's down, by about 30 points, and he's not going to really be campaigning in Maryland. But he should go watch a game sometime. Yeah, sure.
But you have no interest in appearing with him at all.
No.
And you've served with, finally here, we're all looking forward to seeing Margaret do the vice presidential debate with Nora on Tuesday night on CBS. You know Governor Tim Walz. You were governors together.
Yeah.
Is he a strong debater? Are you looking forward to seeing what he does? Do you like him?
I've never seen him debate, but look, I think everybody's going to be interested to tune in. I'm just hopeful that in this debate we can have a real, healthy debate on the issues that people care about. People are concerned about the economy and inflation and affordability. They're concerned about crime and the border. Hopefully, those candidates will talk about it instead of just typical politics.
Governor Larry Hogan, thank you for being here, running for Senate in Maryland. We'll be right back. Thank you. That's it for today. But before we go, we want to say happy birthday to former President Jimmy Carter, who will turn 100 on Tuesday. And also on Tuesday, CBS will host the vice presidential debate, moderated by Margaret and Nora O'Donnell. Make sure to tune in to CBS for the pregame, the debate, and the after-debate analysis. For Face the Nation, I'm Robert Costa. Thanks for joining us.